On today's show, we'll touch on 8 storylines for the Atlanta Hawks this summer. It's a big one for Atlanta, to be sure. We'll put it in context and much more, and all that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1702 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday here in late April. And I want to encourage you, as I always do at the top of the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day. And please check out the show and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. That includes YouTube on the video side, as well as places like Apple and Spotify and CastBox and Pocket Cast, Overcast, all those places on the audio side. I would very much appreciate it if you would subscribe to the show. Ratings and reviews appreciated, and please spread the word about the podcast. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment. I think this is probably the first time I've ever done this, and basically, I'm going to do a 2-part episode by myself. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you will know that I often cut up interviews into 2 parts, and the simple version as to why that is because the Locked On Podcast Network would prefer smaller, shorter content. They don't want an hour and a half level podcast, and that's just the nature of the beast when on a network. But with that said, it's also digestible for listeners. It gives people time to come in and out, etc. And a lot of the time, I do generally between 25 and 35, 40 minutes by myself when I'm doing post-game episodes or mailbag episodes, etc. Today, I have a little bit of a theme that's been going around in the network realm at this point in time. And basically, I'm going to run through the 8 major storylines of the offseason for the Hawks. Some of this will be repetitive, some of it will be broad, but it also sets the table a little bit for what I have to come, which is going to be lots of player reviews, lots of draft content, lots of free agency content. All of that's coming up in the very near future because, by the way, the draft isn't for 2 months. We have a lot of time to kill in between, but I will still be here throughout the entire offseason with 3, 4, 5 episodes per week. So plenty of landscape in front of us. But honestly, I was going to do more than 8 things, but one of the big ones that I talked about was actually on yesterday's show, which was episode 1701 with regard to the salary cap and the luxury tax. If you missed it, by the way, I would encourage you to listen to that podcast, not just that segment, but certainly the back half of it was about the cap and the tax for about 20 minutes or so. This is also a reminder that a lot of these storylines are intertwined. One of the other ones I was considering doing was just about the front office, broadly speaking, but that is encapsulated by basically, I don't know about all of them, but certainly most of these have something to do with the front office. Needless to say, this ownership group and front office have a lot of heat on them coming into the offseason because I continue to think that the roster construction is the primary issue with the team right now, much more than like player development or coaching, etc. And the roster is a front office thing. So this front office is not proven to be bad, but they're not proven to be good either. This is still a young group. They don't have a ton of experience or record of like operation at this point in time. So Hawks fans definitely know that, but sort of there it is in plain terms about why I'm not doing that in particular. But anyway, just using the cap and tax as an example, I can count at least 4 or 5 or 6 storylines that are directly influenced by the cap and by the tax. We'll get into that later as well. So all these things are intertwined on some level, from extensions to trades to free agency. And this is meant to be sort of an overview more than anything else. So again, I'm planning to do player dives, so I'm not going to do like a full hour on some of these things that like I probably would be able to do later on in the summer. But keep that in mind. It's a 2-part episode, and part 1 is coming to you right now. So these are not in order, but I will say the first one is being done for a reason, and that is the most high-profile topic, I'll say, the most prominent topic nationally, locally, and that is the partnership between Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. No surprise, obviously, this could be an hour show or more by itself. I'll give the broad strokes here, set the table a little bit. It's been 2 years. The Hawks made the all-in move 2 summers ago to go after a win-now setup with Dejounte Murray. Since then, they did extend him on a good number, which is actually a positive. But on the court, it's not gone according to plan. The first year, it was explainable. They made the playoffs. The theory of Dejounte helping with Trae on the court didn't really help, but off the court, he did help. He boosted the long nightmare of whenever Trae sat on the bench for the pre-Dejounte era. It was pretty rough. It helped in theory, of course, to have a guy like Quinn Snyder coming in as well. I know he'd already been there a little bit, but someone who's a little bit more innovative. I had belief in that, might be able to unlock some stuff with Trae and Dejounte on the court together. And it's worth noting that Trae and Dejounte both actually had good seasons individually this year. Trae averaged his normal points. He made the All-Star team. He led the league in assist rate. He was number 2 in the league in assists per game. He improved his true shooting percentage. he had his best defensive season ever, in my opinion. It's not even really my opinion. Like both eye test and the numbers will tell you he was better than he's ever been defensively. Dejounte had career highs in scoring and true shooting and three-pointers. He took more threes. He took more free throws in the previous year, et cetera, et cetera. Both guys carried big workloads, especially when Trae was, Trae always does, but Dejounte when Trae was off the floor, when he was hurt for a while. All that said, both these guys are really good players. That gets lost sometimes. It becomes, at least in the fan base that I see sometimes, it becomes Trae versus Dejounte. I get why that happens, but it doesn't really need to be that. It's just kind of just the nature of the beast, I suppose. In my view, Trae's the better player. It's not that close in my opinion. That's also kind of the opinion of the league right now, even if Trae definitely is polarizing, and he is, given his defensive reputation, all that stuff. He's a polarizing player. Dejounte is a little bit easier of a fit in some respects, especially at point guard. He's a little bit bigger at point guard in particular. Defensively, I think he would be better playing point guard than he's been at the two. He's improved as a shooter, etc. I won't keep going there necessarily, but it's clear to the league, to me, and really to most everyone that the Hawks probably need to break up Trae Dejounte at some point. I'm using the word probably on purpose. It is a situation where I believe it's 100% to happen this summer. I'll stress that. It's not 100% to happen. I think it's likely, though, that they will do something with one of them. I gave the stat to Tower Jones earlier this week on the podcast, but for one thing, the Hawks were not good when they played together this year. In fact, they had the worst net rating of any two-man lineup that had a lot of minutes for the Hawks was Trae and Dejounte, and that is unbelievable, honestly. It really is. That doesn't necessarily mean that they could never work together. I have to be honest about that, and they could work it out, but it would be tricky, and that sample size is pretty rough. But generally speaking, they just overlap too much. They're too small together in the backcourt to play defense, in my opinion. They never play well off each other offensively necessarily. There's like little snippets of that, but they don't fit that well together. Trae's a point guard. Dejounte really is a point guard. I know he has size. He can play a little bit of the two, but I think we've now seen both in like the way he carries himself, the way he operates. He's more comfortable on the ball than off the ball. All that said, I think that's pretty obvious at this point in time. Also, this is the first time since he was drafted 6 years ago that I think that there is a non-zero chance that Trae gets traded this summer. Now, that's notable to me. I think it's still unlikely. I think it's still much more likely that Dejounte is traded than Trae as of April 25th, as I'm recording this podcast. That can, of course, change with info that I would get or intel or whatever. But they obviously got pretty close to Trae and Dejounte a couple times in January, February. It didn't happen, but they got close. We'll see what the offers look like. But when the two best and highest paid players on your team don't really work together and the team is underachieving at the same time, the next step, logically, is a breakup. Now, in some respects, you might change the coach, but the Hawks just paid a high-profile coach not even a year and a half ago, and that would be a surprise to me if they changed coaches right now. So I think, oftentimes it's either the star or it's the coach or it's both or whatever. This time, the Hawks have a true star in Trae. They have a sub-star kind of level player in Dejounte, and I think that they're probably going to break them up. Again, they almost did it already a little bit a couple months ago with Dejounte. I tend to believe they're going to do it again. It's not a lock to happen, but that's obviously the storyline that's going to be dictating everything, especially nationally. Like everyone is rushing to get their Trae Young rumor stuff out there right now in April because there's a lot of time between now and the draft. I get it. Dejounte is going to be out there. You got the Lakers, you got the Spurs, these teams that are obviously potentially in the market for point guard help and because they're kind of the same position, there's a lot of overlap there. Like the teams that make sense for Trae makes sense for DJ too. So it's this really interesting combination, but we'll get into that more often later on. But that's just kind of the very obvious number one storyline. I'm not listing these in terms of order, but this one was purposely number one because it's obviously the biggest one heading into the offseason. All right, we'll have more on these. We're going to do 4 on each episode. So part 1's going to have 4, part 2's going to have 4, and we'll have 3 more in this episode. But first, more from our friends on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors and passion, drive, and patience with the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you're looking for to maintain your vehicle and also level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers, they have roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, and much more. Whether you are looking to have speed, power, or style, they have you covered at eBay Motors. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. They also have eBay Guaranteed Fit, which means your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money is coming back to you. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and you are crucially not burning any cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you're looking for, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. All right, and the rest of these are not in order again. So I'm going to go a little bit more big picture on the second one and talk about basically the number 2 storyline is fixing the defense. Now that is very general on purpose. Everyone knows this, but the Hawks can only go so far with their defense being as bad as it has been the last several seasons. It wasn't just this year was kind of the epitome of it, but certainly it's not only this year. I guess if the Hawks were number 1 in offense, they could find a way to be the 4 or 5 seed with this defense that's this bad, but it's hard to do that on purpose. You know what I mean? You don't want to aim for that. That's kind of like the Kings last year, where they were number 1 in offense and they were like 20th in defense. Like that's doable, but it's not something you could just flat out project. So you need to be able to at least reasonably look yourself in the eye and say this team could be average defensively. That was never the case this year. And again, on some level, you are probably always going to be an offense first team when you have Trae as your best player. We'll see if that continues, but I don't believe that the Hawks are unable to build a defense that's competent with Trae Young. Now that narrative is out there, but we've number 1 already seen it happen, which we'll talk about in a second. And you just have to be intentional. What you can't do is have 2 or 3 glaring weaknesses defensively. If you're going to have 2 small guards, Trae and Dejounte, you better be nails in the front court defensively, and they weren't this year. For instance, this year they were 27th in defense. 2 years ago, 22nd in defense, which is better but not great. 3 years ago, 26th in defense. That's obviously really bad. Now, they found a way at times to put defenses that were pretty good together by the numbers when they had John Collins and Clint Capela playing together. That also was limiting offensively because John kind of lost his shooting touch and there were not a ton of space in there. And, of course, they ended up trading John to save money and clear the way for other guys. There were units that were decent enough defensively this year. Okongwu and Jalen have worked pretty well together. Capela and Hunter usually together form a decent enough defense for the Hawks, but too many flaws across the board. They were too small, of course, defensively. Not just the backcourt, although that was part of it, but even on the wings, they were just kind of forced to be too small. I've read about this before, but their lack of forward depth really bit them all the way through the season. They played Bogey a lot. They played Garrison a lot. Those guys are not great defenders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bruno is not a good defensive center at this point. He ended up having to play a lot because Okongwu was out second half of the season. There's lots of stuff there, but it's doable. Now, they were 18th defensively for the full season in 2021 when they made the conference finals. Notably, they were 12th in the second half of the season. 12th. They were 25-11 during that stretch. They were 12th in defense. And people often act like they were only good in the playoffs that year, but it was well before that. The Hawks were a top tier team from basically the middle of the season on that season. And yes, like the combination was basically Trae being awesome, a ton of shooting, and enough defensively, especially with Clint playing great at that point in time. It's a different roster now. Keep that in mind. It's a totally different roster now. Yes, they still have Trae. They still have Clint, but they didn't have Hunter in that stretch at all. They were playing smaller, but not super small. Like it was Herter and Bogey a lot together, but Herter and Bogey are not big, but Herter's a lot bigger than Dejounte, for instance. They were playing Collins at the 4. Collins is a much better defender than what they've had at the 4 sometimes in the last year or so. So like different team. They had Gallo, who's not great defensively, but was big and physical. I could check all the boxes there, but it's a different roster now. But I do think there's a path to them being good enough defensively. Again, hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you can build a team with what they have right now around them with some tweaks and be a top 10 defense. I'm not saying that because they would need some serious overhauls. Now, it's possible, but you would need probably 2 more high-level defending wings to even have a chance to get there, plus some other tweaks potentially. What I'm saying is there is a pathway on a team that has Trae, on a team that has Capela or whatever up front to be pretty decent defensively, but they have to find it. And that means personnel changes. That means maybe some scheme changes. I'm not saying the coaching staff is totally without blame for this, but I still think it's more personnel driven. I've done this before, but if you go up and down the roster from this past season, how many guys would you describe as being above average defensive players at their positions? It's a very, very small list. In fact, you could argue the answer is 0. Now, I wouldn't do that. I would say that guys like Hunter and Jalen and Clint and Onyeka are at least average or better defensively. That's reasonable to say. I think Kobe Bufkin, obviously he's a rookie. You want to throw him out, but like I think by next year, Kobe Bufkin will be at least average, if not better than that defensively, probably better than that right now. But you still have Trae is a minus. Dejounte is a minus. Garrison is probably a minus, although he plays hard. Bogey's a minus. Saddiq Bey is a minus defensively. They have all these guys who were playing real minutes for them. Bruno, minus defensively. It's not always as simple as plus minus. I'm not saying that, but like they don't have any game changers defensively. Back in that run, Clint Capela was a game-changing defender 3 years ago. While he played well this year, at the end of the year in particular, he's not that guy anymore. So that you can't just rely on only him to carry that. And again, like you've lost guys like DeLon Wright, who was a supporting player, who's a really good defender. They just don't have any plus defensive players. And when that happens, and you have clear weaknesses, like you're playing two small guards together a lot, and you're playing Garrison and all those things, like it gets to be pretty obvious why you can't play defense at a high level. And of course, the playing game magnified that. That was an outlier in how bad it was because they were so banged up. No Jalen in that game, no Onyeka in that game, having to play enough guys, even no Vit Krejci at the end of that game, having to play, even start Trae, Dejounte, and Bogey, like that's basically a white flag defensively. Like there's just no chance. But I say all those things. I'm rambling now about this topic, but I'll just say again, the Hawks are going to have to figure out a way to be better than this defensively. That's very obvious, but it's also very true. And it will be hard, not impossible, but hard to be good enough defensively with Trae and Dejounte playing that much together. But even beyond that, that is a problem defensively. It has been a problem defensively. But even if you put that to the side, they were not good enough everywhere else defensively this year to have that be even the whole discussion. So that's broad on purpose, but it really is a situation where, like, that's why I was asking about it at media days, exit interviews, behind the scenes. It's like, all right, the plan's got to be, I know I love defense. If you listen to the podcast, you'll know that I'm a big kind of defender of defense. Like I put a lot of emphasis on that, but I think it's also just real. Like the Hawks are not going to necessarily be a dominant defense, but they have to find a way roster wise and execution wise to be better than they were, or nothing else really matters at the end of the day. All right. We'll have more coming up in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp, and every once in a while, you need something to get off your chest. Really that simple. Whether it's something that's big or small, something can really start to get to you if you actually let it happen in your life, and it's important to let this stuff out, especially as someone who happens to be unbiased in your life that can listen to what you are saying. And today I want to tell you about something that I've been dealing with for a while. Maybe for a few of you might understand this, but I have some unease about the next steps in the media industry right now, especially with regard to what I do, podcasts, writing, etc. I've lost some jobs in the recent past, and whether there's actually going to be jobs available is really kind of an important looming thing in my life. And of course, not the most intense thing for everybody involved or the most life-altering topic for some people, but it also is a reminder that therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us, including me, have bigger problems than this, but still, it's always quite important to get stuff off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, BetterHelp is the place to do that. You should give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, and the place to go is betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. And when you get there, it's 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. The place to go, once again, is betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, that's HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's show is brought to you by DoorDash, and it's never too late to show your mom some love this Mother's Day with the folks at DoorDash. Surprise your mom with flowers or gadgets or essentials all in one place, delivered right to her door. Does your mom happen to have a sweet tooth, or is she a tech enthusiast? Is she a beauty connoisseur? Is she outdoorsy by chance? No matter what she happens to be into, you make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and many other options. You can pair flowers with a gift card so you can celebrate any way she wants to, or if she wants something else, try a bookstore, coffee shop gift card, or something else beyond that. You cannot go wrong with the folks at DoorDash. Get thoughtful gifts at the way that she deserves them, with the convenience that you actually need to make it all happen. Choose same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive at her door with the folks at DoorDash. Shop with savings to make her proud. And also with Dash membership, you can save with a $0 delivery fee and reduce service fees on eligible orders from Dash merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including service fees, apply. Get your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order right now with the promo code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA as the code. Order through DoorDash app today. Terms apply. All right, two more topics on this particular part of the podcast. Then part two will be available in your podcast feed of choice right away. And the end of this one's going to be actually a little bit young guy skewing. So first is the lottery and the draft is the third storyline. Obviously, straight ahead, the lottery is May 12th. That's a Sunday this year. That's a notable change. It's a little bit over 2 weeks until then. It's coming fast. We'll have much more draft content post-lottery, but probably a little bit before that as well. At the moment, the Hawks only have one pick in the entire draft. Because the Kings didn't make the playoffs, so they'll keep that pick into 2025. The Hawks don't have a second-round pick at all this year. That could change, given how many transactions happen every year in the second round. The Hawks might enter that day. It's a 2-day draft this time around with no picks. and it might be able to either buy a pick or trade for a pick. Everyone knows my feelings about selling picks. I think straight up selling picks is a terrible idea, but some teams might still sell them or trade them for cheap, etc. There can be value to be had there. And the Hawks did actively last year move around second round. They prioritized Mo Gueye. They drafted Seth Lundy. That was a new regime, and they kind of did a little bit more in the second round. I will run down the math a little bit on the lottery pick so far, but before I do that, I have to stress one thing that I say every year, which is that you're drafting for the future and not the present. That's even more so in a case like this year's draft where it's pretty weak. But I would always, always, always guard against projecting whoever the Hawks pick at any spot in the draft as like a huge, huge piece for year one if they're trying to win. And the Hawks are trying to win right now. It can happen. Some rookies are better than others for sure, but you're taking the guys that you hope to be best in 2 or 3 years rather than this year. By the way, last year's draft was a perfect example of that. Kobe Bufkin was not a pick for last year. It was a pick for the future. They knew they had Trae and Dejounte. They were not drafting Kobe Bufkin to play a lot of minutes last year. Then he got hurt too, but that was a future-facing pick, a guy they liked the most. That's kind of the way you should operate in the draft. Anyway, the Hawks have the 10th overall slot in the lottery right now. That gives them a 66% chance, roughly, that's roughly, at the number 10 pick in the draft. So there's one spot most likely for the Hawks to pick in the draft. It's 10. Then after that, it's number 11. They have a 19% chance at that. So they have 85-ish% to be picking 10 or 11 in the draft. So you can plan on that. It's not going to definitely happen, but that's the spot to plan on if you are a Hawks fan, 10 or 11 in the draft. There is a 14% chance to be in the top 4 somewhere. 3% chance at number 1, etc. There's a tiny, tiny chance they could be actually 12th or 13th, but that's a 1% chance or less, so we'll see. One thing that I will say is that this draft is not very good, but the part that everyone hates, including me, about this draft is the very, very top. There is not a consensus of any kind at the top. Alex Sarr, Risha Shea, Donovan Clingan, Reed Shepard, name your guy. There's all kinds of uncertainty. Ron Holland, Matas Buzelis, guys I like for sure, but there's not a consensus top 1, top 2, top 3, top 4 of any kind. Once you get to where the Hawks pick or below, it's kind of normal. Like I would say it's still worse than usual, but it's not that bad for me. It's the very top that's kind of the rough part in this one. But anyway, we'll have much more on the draft, but that's a pretty straight ahead storyline because the Hawks do have a lottery pick, which is the only small uptick from not making the playoffs is that you have a lottery pick and some upward mobility there. And at the very least, a top 11 or 12 pick in the draft. The last storyline for this part 1 is going to be the next steps for the young guys, which of course includes and is headlined by Kobe Bufkin, Mo Gueye, AJ Griffin, and Seth Lundy. After the draft, of course, it's like a segue to the young guys. That makes sense. But it's not breaking any ground, but the Hawks are going to need some internal improvements and development from these guys. And the summer is a good time to kind of track that throughout. You have Kobe, you have Mo, you have AJ, and Seth. They're all interesting prospects who are very, very young. Griffin's in year 3 next year, but he basically had a lost season. And also, he is quite a bit younger than Seth Lundy. He's very, very young still. It's too early to know who's going to play in Summer League. That's kind of the public-facing time to see these guys, but behind the scenes is actually much more important. I know why Summer League gets attention. I go every year. I cover it. We watch it. I get all that. But those are very, very small sample sizes. Again, in a weird setting, it's more important what you're doing away from that. And you sort of see the gains there on your body, on your skills, etc. It might be like it has been in the previous years where guys might come back and play a little bit. But all 4 of those guys might pop up in Summer League. Will not surprise me at all. Bufkin is the clearest guy to kind of watch as the first-round pick from last year, especially if Dejounte or Trae get moved. There's a very clear spot for him. But even then, he got to play a lot this year at the end of the season. His defensively, he popped a lot, honestly. He looked pretty good. Offensively, he was hit and miss, as you expect for a young guy. But I think I like Kobe still as much as I did a year ago. I think he looked good this year. He has the size to play both guard spots. Ideally plays a lot of point guard, but still some too, probably defensively in particular. And we'll see on that. Mo Gueye's flashes were very evident this season. His tools, his size, his burst are awesome, honestly. It's going to be huge for him to actually stay healthy, knock on wood, get some on-court seasoning in the future to figure out kind of what the Hawks are going to be able to do with him long-term. But the flashes were enough to be very, very excited about Mo Gueye. Seth Lundy is a lower ceiling player for sure, but he shot it well. He could be a useful role player, I think, in the NBA sooner rather than later, honestly. Hopefully he can stay healthy. He got banged up at the end of the year, but I like Seth quite a bit. He is a little bit older. Keep that in mind. And then I won't claim to know what's going on with AJ Griffin after a strange season where he was basically just gone for a long time. He talked to media day, extra interviews, didn't say a whole lot about that. I would definitely say he's still an NBA shooter, and he's still 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until August. So, I get the impetus to kind of give up on AJ right now because he had a rough lost season. Keep in mind, he has, A very clear NBA skill as a shooter, and B, pedigree, high school All-American, 5-star prospect, all that stuff. And then C, he has age. He's 20 years old. So it may not work. They might trade him. It might just never happen for AJ. But after the way he plays as a rookie and all those skills and that pedigree, I wouldn't give up just yet. That's kind of what I would say about AJ at this point in time. In fact, if he was in this draft, he'd be a first-round pick. I'm pretty sure. So like even with what you know now, he would go pretty high in this draft. So he's still 20 years old, and that's kind of the end of that. So that'll be it for today. But like, a mix and match of part one here about like obvious big picture stuff from Trae and Dejounte, the defense, and then some young guys at the end of the podcast. We'll get into 4 more on part 2, and I'll just tease those for you now. If you made it to the end of part 1, congratulations. We'll be talking about Jalen Johnson in part 2. We'll be talking about other key guys who could be traded other than Trae and Dejounte. We're talking about Saddiq Bey and Vit Krejci, and then also the never-ending saga of will they or won't they at center for the Hawks. So we'll get into all of that. Stay tuned for part 2. Please subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter at Lots on Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. Follow my Patreon work covering the Braves and Hawks in written and sometimes audio form when it comes to press conferences and Braves audio, etc. Follow that at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. I do appreciate it. And click on over to part 2 right now.